Our next talk is by Anna Polemikou. Anna is an adjunct lecturer of psychology in the School of Humanities at the University of the Aegean, and she also has her own client-centered practice in Athens, Greece. Anna's title today is Coping with EcoAnxiety, Climate Change as a Spiritual Emergency.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike. Hello, everyone. I'm joining you from not so sunny Athens in Greece, which is not very common for this time of year. So that's a good, that sort of validates the topic that I want us to cover today. Let me see if I can just share the screen. Okay, I think I could do that. Let me see, is that working? Oh, there we go. Perfect. Okay, what I'm gonna do is probably open that up a bit. So I can keep an eye on the rest of the slides that I have, ideally. Keep track of time, maybe. And okay, there we go. So what I wanted to touch upon today is something that covers another area, an emerging area that might be associated with a spiritual crisis and spiritual emergencies in the future or already in some parts of the world. I'd like to cover this new phenomenon of eco-anxiety that is related to climate change and see what kind of implications that may have on people, especially children, adolescents, and young adults. We see some of these issues also rising, some of these eco-emotions, these emotions associated with climate change, also arising in the older generations as well. We're going to cover how that happens or how that may potentially happen in the near future. But before I start off with that, and then I'm going to end with touching upon a couple of pointers as to what we may do in order to alleviate some of that pressure and maybe facilitate children to become more resilient towards all these changes that we're currently facing with the climate. So I tried to find a forecast that shows where I am currently at, Athens, but I couldn't find one in English, so it was only in Greek. So I'd like to ask you, you're free to share your thoughts and opinions in the chat as we go along and see how these ideas and opinions transform throughout today's meeting. So what's the weather in your part of the world today? What's it like? Is it something that you're used to having at this time of the year? Is it different? Is it warmer? Is it harsher? As I said, here in Greece, we've had an incredibly harsh winter, and we had a start to the spring that's not customary. We're not used to this kind of weather. It's not too cold, but at this time, as I'm speaking, but it has not been as we're used to it. And I want to make that distinction between climate and weather before I move on. So the climate is a range of possibilities within which weather happens. So what we have going on today is not necessarily what is related to climate change. So the weather can happen to be different from time to time. But what we expect is what we call the climate. So what finally happens is the weather, and the weather, all the phenomena of the weather taken together form this climate. Now, I don't know, let me see, can I see the chat as we go along, or ideally I'd like to see the chat. So how concerned are you about climate change on a daily basis? I see many different ages participating, so I'm interested to see if we measure it on a scale from 1, being not at all concerned, to 10, which might be constantly worried or anxious or stressed about it. where do you think you'd be able to place yourself at the time being? Oh, now I can see the chat. Excellent. Okay. Wow. I see. So we have 9s and 10s and 8s there. Okay. I'm wondering if that relates to where you're currently at. So would it change depending on where you live at the moment? Does it have to do with maybe where you, a part of the world that you used to live in and you left and you immigrated from? Wow, Mirabai. Okay, a lot of people can't sleep at night worrying about it. And you're not alone. There are a lot of people in the world that are currently going through these emotions. So what is it that has given rise to all this anxiety? Well, when we're talking about climate change, I want to make sure that we understand that we commonly agree that we're talking about the type of climate change that can be attributed to human impact. So we're talking about anthropogenic climate change, the result of what us people are actually doing to change the climate through carbon emissions, through all these practices that we are very familiar with. That seems to be the main issue that we need to deal with at the moment. More than 11,000 scientists seem to have declared that the current climate situation is indeed a state of emergency. And this goes hand in hand with mental health concerns, because it seems to be that both these issues are defining issues for the current generations. And between them, they seem to have a great association. So if we didn't have all these changes in the climate, we expect, or if the natural world, the natural environment around us was more stable, we wouldn't expect that many peaks in mental health problems. So as a result, we see a lot of people experiencing grief, worry, and even a sense of doom regarding the future. And this is something that, given that these global temperatures are further expected to rise and other climate-related changes are expected to take place, this is expected to lead to increased rates of depression, aggression, and suicide rates in the future. Okay. So what seems to be the case is that we have a lot of climate protests, a lot of heat waves. Recently in Greece, we had snowstorms that created many problems. We're not used to having snowstorms, especially in Athens. We're not prepared for that. So it stopped everything. Everyone was paralyzed. And a barrage of natural disasters that have pushed the climate up in the news agenda. So whether one is currently experiencing the effects of climate change or not, it is something that we constantly see on the news, on social media, and it encompasses studies that start off from Greenland all the way down to Australia, with a lot of people reporting stress or depression about the climate. As a result, we see an increase, an explosion of eco-anxiety across the Western world, even though the Western world is not the segment of the planet's population that is most affected by this phenomenon. Now, I want to make the distinction between anxiety and eco-anxiety. When we're talking about anxiety in the general sense, we're talking about an emotion which is characterized by an apprehension, which is associated with somatic symptoms of tension, which an individual anticipates because of some sort of impeding danger or catastrophe or misfortune. So we're talking about something that has not yet happened. It is something that is oriented towards the future, in contrast to fear, which is present oriented, which is fear of something that exists in the here and now. So when we're talking about eco-anxiety, this prolonged sense of indefinite worry seems to appear for no apparent reason, even though we know that there are a lot of issues that lead us to believe that the outcome is not that favorable. We don't expect things to get much better regarding climate crisis. So when we define climate anxiety or eco-anxiety, we're actually talking about a sentiment that represents a chronic fear of environmental doom. It's as if someone feels like there's no return, there's no going back, that this is all predetermined. There's and we're sort of doomed to go through the worst of it. So it seems irreversible, and it concerns the person, themselves, their children, and even possibly future generations. Now, eco-anxiety is not something that we can diagnose at the moment, and we're going to see later on that there's a huge debate going on about whether it should be diagnosed, whether it is an actual mental health problem or not. Similarly to issues regarding accepting spiritual emergencies as a mental health problem or not. These are ongoing debates and conversations. It is being recognized, though, as a description, as a valid emotional response to threats, and as a phenomenon that we see more and more of in the general population. So it can, according to the Urban Dictionary, it's found its way through there. We're talking about the type of anxiety which is associated with the fear of harming the environment. So being apprehensive about the kind of practices that one follows that may have an effect on the ecology, and the fear of one's experiences when they second guess their actions because they fear that they might impact the earth in a negative manner. So having a generalized fear about their choices, of what they're going to shop, what they're going to eat, how they're going to travel, and always second guessing and getting that feeling, that pang of guilt or anxiety of whether they're doing something wrong. Glenn Albrecht is generally thought of as the person who coined the term. And he talks about it as a generalized sense that the ecological foundations of existence are in the process of collapse. So he adopts a more existential view of this, a more a deeper, a more in-depth view of the actual nature of eco-anxiety. Then we have other approaches, such as the one by Daniel Goleman. Most people probably know him from popularizing the term emotional intelligence in the 90s. He's also dabbled with ecological intelligence as well in more recent years. And there was this paper that he published in the New York Times in 2009, where he talked about eco-angst. So it was that moment where a new bit of ecological information that one did not possess previously about some product or other plunges us into a moment or more of despair at the planet's condition and the fragility of our place on it. And this emerged as a thought when he bought a toy car for his grandson, and he found out that the paint that had been used to produce that was toxic and environmentally not friendly. So he had that sentiment that he shared, and that led to him publishing the book Ecological Intelligence, which covers a lot of the issues that have to do with being aware of the environment and navigating oneself within all these new realities. Now, another person who's worth mentioning is, we already talked about Glenn Albrecht. He's a professor emeritus at the University of West Australia, if I remember correctly. And he's a philosopher basically who's interested in geological issues. And he published a book called The Earth Emotions, which encompassed new terms, neologisms, which describe the full spectrum of emotional responses to the emergent state of the world and planet. I want us to quickly cover some of these because I imagine that in the near future, we might see some overlap with issues that have to do with spiritual crises and spiritual emergencies. So he talks about eco-grief, eco-trauma, geotrauma, and a new word which he coined, which is solastalgia. We'll see these in a bit. So there are, if anyone is interested, I'm happy to share more information. I'm just presenting a brief a table from the Graham Institute about some of these emotions, how they're defined, and what the evidence for them is so far. So we have eco-anxiety. That's probably the most investigated. It's also known as eco-distress. As I've already said, the American Psychological Association defined eco-anxiety as the chronic fear of environmental doom, and that includes a lot of emotions such as anxiety, worry, stress, hopelessness, sometimes behaviors such as sleep disturbance, irritability, despair. And then on the other hand, we have climate grief or ecological grief or eco grief, which is the grief that one feels when faced with ecological losses that they have either experienced or anticipated. Maybe, I don't know what it's like where you live, but here in Greece, we see a lot of changes happening in our islands. They have drastically changed within the last few decades, and that causes, especially the older generations, to go through a period of mourning of all the places that no longer exist and carry a lot of memories and a lot of their own identity in a sense. And then solastalgia has to do with the distress that one experiences when they live in a particular place that is changing as we speak. So there's no comfort in returning to that place and getting the comfort that one used to have by being there. Let me briefly go through, how am I with time? Sorry.
You're just about coming up for 20 minutes.
Okay, so I'll go through this a bit quickly. So the difference between the two is that eco grief basically is a mourning response, whereas climate grief or eco anxiety has more to do with that tension of something that we're anticipating to happen in the future. By the same token, solastalgia is a unique form of mental anguish that is caused by the living experience of one residing somewhere where there's a negative environmental change. So if there's a new factory being built right next to them, or next to their premises, or or there's been a flood that has erased everything. That's the type of, there's no place to return basically with solastalgia. And it's a very unique type of feeling. Okay, regarding whether it's a mental health disorder or not, most scientists and researchers accept it as a real phenomenon, but not necessarily as an illness. The reason being, the argument behind this being that if we recognize something that arises, that stems from something real and something that should be considered a natural response to something that's already happening, then what will happen is we're going to make people such as those who deny climate change win. And this is what Graham Lawton has introduced in his own argument. So if it becomes pathologized, the forces of denial will have won because normal feelings will officially be recognized as an abnormal state of mind. Okay, that's the tip of the iceberg, basically. I just want us to go through a couple of images of how children and youth see this. We have so many events going on worldwide, and it seems to be taking massive proportions, especially during the past few years. We know that there was a global survey conducted on climate anxiety at Bath University recently, a couple of years ago. 10,000 adolescents took place and young people between the ages of 16 and 25 in 10 countries. It's been the largest scientific survey to be conducted to date. And across all countries, about 59% of respondents were worried about climate change. More than 75 found the future frightening. More than half reported emotions such as sadness, anxiety, anger. More than 45% felt that the climate change negatively affected their daily life, and they perceived inadequate government response and associated feelings of betrayal by the people who were older or were in positions of power to help. So this is what happened in Australia a couple of years ago regarding protests, Vienna and Austria. Hong Kong, we see a global effort to reverse this. And this may come across as an adaptive type of reaction or a collection of reactions, maladaptive reactions, and eco-paralysis. Adaptive reactions are primarily those that channel one's distressing feelings towards more constructive attitudes and behaviors, such as changing food habits or being more selective with transport. Maladaptive reactions include those that have an effect on pre-existing mental health problems or other types of behaviors. So someone who already suffers from depression might see that being exacerbated, or PTSD, etc. And then there's another form where people just become completely inactive because they don't know what to do. They completely freeze because they're so stressed that whatever they do feel is inadequate, or they don't know how to engage with this perception of a threatening environment around them. So we see that often in younger people as well. Okay, so just to tie it all in, what can we do to assist with all this situation? Well, basically, one of the things that have been proposed is building more emotional and spiritual robustness. So one of the options that are available to do that is through the installation of hope. And that includes two basic factors. One being facing the truth. So not being afraid to actually see what's happening. And it's not that, we can't really say that it's all that positive or optimistic. The truth is the truth, and things are hard and challenging. And then helping the individual or the child coexist with the constant sense of uncertainty, being able to tolerate that level of uncertainty. So that means being able to talk openly about climate change, being informed, being educated about it, and being able to cross-check the data, and therefore avoid being over-optimistic or over-pessimistic. Being able to sit with those emotions and hold a safe place for the child or the adolescent or the young person, not without minimizing that discomfort. These existential worries are not unfounded and should be taken seriously. But in order to do that, we have to assist with their relief through either emotional self-regulation or tolerance of uncertainty. Teach children that there are seasons in the soul. So if you're feeling distressed, that doesn't mean that you're always going to be distressed. It's not like winter's always going to be there. And sometimes it's necessary to go through winter time for spring to come. But when we see that a child is stuck in one of these weathers, one of these seasons of the soul, they might be needing more assistance, proper assistance to the mental health avenue. Opening up their perspective so that they can find a balance between optimism and pessimism. Yes, many species have become extinct, but at the same time, many have restored their populations. Both are true. So if they can hold both realities in a wider perspective, then they're able to see more possibilities. And help them take action. So by taking action, the individual, community, and national levels, we can help them channel their emotions in more productive and helpful ways. I have plenty of recommended readings for anyone who's interested in further reading about this. I know that there are probably a lot of things that can be tied into from a spiritual emergency or spiritual crisis perspective, either at the time being or potentially in the future. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your attention. I'm open to any kinds of questions that you may want to ask.